This is my broadcast um, of the funeral of Philip, Prince Philip, from my personal perspective and from my local perspective from Israel, the Middle East. So this is what I want to say. My late father, was born 1925, so he's about the same era, the same time of Philip. We had in Israel a sort of mixed feeling towards the British. On the one hand, the British were fighting. Let's not forget they were the only ones fighting the Nazis for 6 years, and so on one hand, appreciation, I would say. On the other hand, they limited the ability of Jews to immigrate to Israel. Of course, it was in Israel then. It was called Palestine by the Romans and the British, who had a mandate here since the end of World War One. So we had a very ambivalent attitude towards the British, admiring the cultural values, of course, and their standing up to the Nazis. On the other hand, especially Philip. On the other hand, of course, mixed feelings about limiting the ability of Jews to immigrate here. So, and I guess the British had very similar ambivalent feelings towards the Jewish population in Israel. Okay, so let's continue to this article in Art. It says there was not a less likely match for Elizabeth, Princess Elizabeth, than the Greek Prince Philip Battenberg. For those of you who are confused, he's actually not Greek, but he was sort of appointed, his family was appointed there. They're actually Danish. And I guess he has roots in being related to Queen Victoria as well from his mother's side. So at the age of a year and a half, he was in exile. His father abandoned the family. His mother was hospitalized in a psychiatric unit, and his sisters married Nazis. But Philip, whose family had to escape Greece due to a military revolution, and his father had a death warrant on, yeah, he would have been executed. He had a death warrant on his name, was a reminder to what the British royal family wanted to deny: the revolutionary wave that swept Europe in the last 200 years and ended all those royal families, ancient royal families. For the British royal family, it was easier to tell themselves it's not going to happen to us, that the British people are very disciplined and they will prefer a king or a queen born to this status. But if it wasn't for Philip fighting in World War II very bravely as an officer in the British Navy, probably the love of Elizabeth for him wouldn't have overcome her parents' fear, and he would have not been able to marry her. So his actions, contrary to the British royals or any royal family, he actually earned his position. So love won, and Philip, the first foreign refugee who lost his country and all his property, um, and instead of them, he adopted Britain as his homeland. Thanks to him, the British royal family was saved. Contrary to the new family members, Philip understood that the people can anytime um, um, deny the royal family, and it could happen even in conservative Britain. So 6 years after his marriage to Elizabeth, he already began to put his mark when he insisted that the ceremony of her being what is the word exactly in English, of her being made queen was going to be broadcast live on TV, on television, and that way there was less mystery. And now, 7 years later, it's hard to understand how revolutionary that broadcast was, the first time in color, even though in Britain there were hardly any color TVs. The message was very clear. towards the inhabitants of the of of UK. And the fact that 3/4 of the British public today, continues to support the British family is largely thanks to Philip and his insistence on exposing his family to the public eye. In 1969, when Canada was one of the 14 countries in which the Queen is officially and symbolically the head of the state, it asked to be a republic. Philip said, even if people feel that we don't have a role to play, let's end it in a nice way, in a friendly way, without fighting. We're here for our health. We're not here for our health. So even though it is absurd that the royal family and it's a status that goes through the family, inherited in the family from one generation to another, there is a need for people still to be in a symbolic role as the head of the state. King and queen are not a bad option. This is the writer of the article says. But in the times of mass media, the king or the queen have to have some sort of normalization and also be remain loyal to national values and traditions. Philip knew his wife can embalm. She can be this symbol. She can personify this symbol. If only they let the British public see enough of her. Not too much, but not too little. He understood very well the limitations of royalty, but also the limitations of a democratic parliament system. So even in the times where there's a lot of scandals around the royal family, the best argument for this royal family is that the British don't have a better substitute. There's not an elected president who could unite so much affection or support as the Queen, and they don't want that a person who gets a lot of criticism as a prime minister will also be the head of the state. So in Israel, when the president is afraid to act, we can understand the British. We have a president who has only official duties, but he can decide who is going to be prime minister. So we can understand why the British prefer the Queen. Philip has lasted 67 years until 2 years ago he officially retired at the age of 97 from his royal service. Elizabeth still holds on at 94. You don't have to be a supporter of the royal family to appreciate the commitment and the consistency to such a job that is so not appreciated enough. But when Philip is gone, and in a few years the Queen, there will not be anymore the thread that connects the British to the myth of a good war where Britain was the only one who stood in the front all 6 years fighting Nazi Germany. So yeah, this is a loss of a generation. Will the royal family survive when Charles, the heir to the throne, will lead it when he's old, maybe a bit odd? Contrary to his parents, he's not part of the historical uniting ethos. And contrary to his father, he's a bit shy. Philip lost his temper in front of the media, but he always knew how to hide it in a cynical joke. The prince, who was in exile. He knew what it's like to lose your country and to be in exile. So he managed to save the family business of his wife and to help lead it towards the new century. His sons and his grandchildren already have it for granted, take it for granted. So I don't know why it's stuck.
Will be taken inside the chapel, and then that procession of family members and the coffin will make their way round the West Steps. And as a nation, we're asked to pause and mark that minute's silence. The royal family will also take their places and stop to remember their father and grandfather.
And just tell us about the grandfather part of it, the three grandsons walking together.
Yes, and I think inevitably there will be a focus on his three grandsons, most notably because there have been difficult moments for the family recently, particularly amongst the Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex.
Yeah.
And there has been a discussion about the fact that they are not going to be walking side by side. Between them is going to be their cousin, Peter Phillips.
So they're not going to be
I
walking.
think the family would point to the fact that Peter Phillips was the eldest grandson. Of course, publicly there's so much focus on the Cambridges and the Sussexes, but it was important, I think, for Prince Philip that his eldest grandson would also take part in that procession.
And Alistair, tell us more about the service,
Well,
and in particular Her Majesty
I love these
the Queen
uniforms.
will be sitting on her own, and the chair, the seat beside her, empty, of course, where Prince Philip used to sit.
Of course, it is the agony of witnessing a widow in the first stages of grief. But at the same time, you say alone, I think so many people who have to live in their family bubbles are of necessity alone in the churches when they come together, even at the reduced number of 30. But she won't be entirely alone because she'll be surrounded by her family and because she has this very deep faith. You're hearing in the background the corporal of the guard who's about to post the sentries who will march straight past us and go up the hill, as they do regularly on the hour throughout Prince Philip's life, keeping this castle safe as one of the homes of Her Majesty the Queen. Passing us right now, the Grenadier Guards. Immaculate, the Duke of Edinburgh was their colonel for many, many years and knew so many of them by name. It was quite fun when he used to go and see them and get stuck right into chatting with them about where they've been in operations.
So
Anybody's been in London, Buckingham Palace.
So they are going to go out to the far distances of the castle and make sure everything is absolutely as it should be. And also passing behind our window now is the superintendent of the castle, who has been putting together all the plans and arrangements for this event, a member of the royal household, but responsible to the Queen for making sure that the castle is properly run. And whilst, of course, the army...
So it's like changing of the guard happens every hour, but now it's going to be even more special.
Right, so better explain the sally port.
Well, a sally port in a castle is a route that the troops within it know in order to escape. And there are a couple here, but they keep them very quiet. In fact, they hid the crown jewels in the sally port during the Second World War.
Okay, back to the service. Starts with that minute's silence at 3 p.m. for the entire nation.
That is the moment which the Queen particularly wanted for the entire nation who can't, if they want to be involved, be here. They can focus on that moment and come together with her and her family on the top of the final landing before the door. And we will then be able to contemplate the life of service that this prince has given to his queen.
And we're just showing on screen there the order of service. You mentioned there the national silence, then the sentences followed by the bidding.
And in all of it, you see the badge that he had at the top of all his notepaper. The badge which showed the coronets above the circled garter, and then the representation of Edinburgh's castle. And because he was the Duke of Edinburgh, one forgets that he carried the branding of that great city of Scotland all over the world when he was at the Queen's side, and made sure that everyone knew of Edinburgh through its Duke.
Just tell us, Rhiannon, just about how central the chapel, St George's Chapel, is to the royal family and, of course, to Windsor Castle.
Well, if we just still take a look at the order of service, and this is something that the Archbishop was saying to you yesterday, is just how much Prince Philip wanted to be involved in the service and the planning around this event. When you look through the service, that influence is very clear. We know that he chose all the music. We know that there will be a very small choir, just 4 people involved in the choir because of social distancing and COVID restrictions. But amongst the music that he's chosen, the Jubilate written for St George's Chapel, that was at Prince Philip's request. Also a psalm specially set to music, that will also feature within the service. As Alistair was mentioning earlier, the buglers of the Royal Marines will not just sound the last post, but will also call action stations, which is a call to action in the Royal Navy. And I think quite nicely reflects the fact that so many members of the family this week have said, actually, he would want us to get on with the job. He would want us to keep carrying on. But also, I think what some people might be slightly surprised about is there will be no eulogy and there are no readings from the family. Now, we're told by the palace that they are not usually a feature of royal funerals, so we shouldn't be surprised to see that. However, we know that Prince Philip has been so instrumental in planning his own funeral. You could have thought, well, maybe they would have decided to weave in some readings, potentially. But in some ways, maybe he was protecting his family from having to stand up and speak publicly. They're already in the public eye.
I think the Queen is very old-fashioned, and the tradition always used to be that you didn't have family getting involved in religious services. You just left it to the clergy. And because the Queen is of that generation, I think she would think it not right for her, or certainly not for her husband, to have someone who she probably doesn't feel knows him as well as she does, telling her all about how good his life was. I think that, in a sense, the purpose of this is the religious focus of his faith and the readings of the Bible, which I think the Queen will take the view were just about good enough. And the best people to read them are the Archbishop and the Dean. After all, they're the only 2 clergy allowed in there.
About the length of it all. You know, Prince Philip, talking to the Archbishop of Canterbury yesterday, he's talking about when he was preaching at Sandringham, you know, how it was made very clear, you've got to keep it fairly short.
I think so. And the Queen doesn't tend to attend long services. And, you know, this is going to be a very difficult one for her. This is an exceptional one. She's been to the memorial services at the end of wars, at the end of battles. And for her Majesty, to have to hold a steady lip and a steady face through those moments of immense grief for the nation. Now it's her personal experience. She is now alone, she is a widow, and I'm always reminded of that remarkable phrase that she had carved into the pillar of St. Thomas's Church in New York after 9/11. And it says, "Grief is the price we pay for love."
Wow.
And right now, that is the price the Queen is paying for the love of her husband today.
That's beautiful.
Rhiannon, just talk us through how Her Majesty the Queen is involved in the procession. I mean, she's going to view the hearse and the coffin and then be driven to St George's.
Beautiful family.
I just wanted to say that within the bidding, which will be read by the Duke of Windsor, the Dean of Windsor, sorry, there is a mention of that unwavering loyalty to our Queen. So there will be elements of personal words within the service, but we have not seen the Queen this week. So the first moment that we will see her is as she leaves her apartments and steps into the State Bentley and makes her way, the car moving behind the procession to take her place behind her husband's coffin. And we will then see her sitting alone within St George's Chapel because of the social distancing restrictions. We know that they will also have to wear masks because of the restrictions that are currently in place. But I think that will be a particularly poignant moment. So many of the pictures this week have been a reflection of his unwavering support to her, the fact that he was always alongside her, or certainly one step behind. And there are many people who will now wonder how she will fare now that her husband has died. But also I think she is very much a woman of that wartime generation, very matter of fact when it comes to the matter of death. And so she would have known this was coming, but it will not make today any easier, I suspect. And on the weekend, her children were talking about how his death has left a void in their life. And the Queen herself at the moment is processing how she is dealing with that. But the family themselves have, in their statements, in their words, have talked about how They are now
Okay,
there to
this is
support
part
her,
one. We'll be
supporting the monarch,
continuing.
but also their granny, as they've described her.
So many happy moments we're looking at there. Alistair, who did we just see march through that?
You saw marching down the hill as we look back at that marvellous moment as the Queen got onto the royal barge from the Britannia to go for the river pageant. We just saw some of the magic went past us. That was the Royal Corps of Signals, and they are the signallers who will make sure that the guns are fired at the right time and finished at the right time and communicate from one side of the procession to the other. There is, of course, reality behind the magic, but it will make sure that everything is communicated effectively. But we remember very well when the Queen with the Duke, Sailor Prince at her side.
It was terrible.
Oh, ghastly it was. I remember a lot of the team covering it got extremely wet, including poor old Prince Philip, who actually became slightly unwell as a result of it. And, you know, we talk about how the Queen will be alone today. I remember at the great service in St. Paul's after this Thames River pageant, Her Majesty had to walk the full length of the nave of St. Paul's on her own because Prince Philip was unwell in hospital at that time. And, you know, I think those moments did prepare the Queen for this time. And I think the one thing probably the Queen dreaded was that Prince Philip would become unable to do all the things that he wanted to do. And maybe the timing of his death has meant that mercifully he was never left unable to do the things he wanted to do.
There was a marvellous moment, an anecdote from that pageant, wasn't there, when people asked the Duke of Edinburgh, why did you stand up the whole time? And he said, well, because there were those two chairs, weren't there, those two thrones behind him for him to sit on. And I remember him saying then, well, we didn't want to look like the Beckhams by sitting on those.
Certainly a sense of humour, and I think that is what has endeared the Duke of Edinburgh to so many people, and why we've seen so many people wanting to come here to Windsor. Of course, the royal family discouraging crowds from gathering here today, but behind us we can see all of the wonderful flowers that people have brought. The staff bringing them inside the chapel, inside the castle grounds, and placing them on the grass outside of the chapel. So as the royal family make their way towards the service, they will be able to take in those tributes that have come from people